Today I'm looking at Maize by Finish Line Games. Since it was only a few months old when I first played it, this marks the most modern game I've ever reviewed. Although contemporary, it's also somewhat of an obscure one, considering I've hardly seen anyone else talking about it. In fact, I believe that this is the first original game ever released by Finish Line Games, their only other release being an HD remake of the game Cell Damage. So what is this game? Maize is a first-person adventure game involving sentient corn. The gameplay is incredibly simple, and you're introduced to all of the keys early on. Shift to run, mouse to pick up items, all the basic stuff. It also feels the need to let you know that the Q key doesn't do anything. In fact, it wants to be so sure you know this that it reminds you once in a while as you're playing. This is an early introduction to the game's humor, which is one of its strongest attributes. You wake up on a farm with no real idea why you're there, who you are, or what you're supposed to be doing. The visuals are quite nice to look at. It's not the peak of gaming graphics, but the colorful yet detailed surroundings are pretty cool. The gameplay is very straightforward. You simply search for items in the available area and use them, sometimes in unison with other items to progress. This is made easier by having every single interactable object in the game have a glowing outline. If you're still having trouble, you can look at the description of an item not only for a laugh, but often a hint on what you're supposed to be doing next. There's also other items in the game that aren't used to progress, but are instead spread around the game sort of as collectibles. If you read these at first, you'll think that they're just quirky objects to keep you laughing as you make your way through the game, but as you go on you'll realize that you're actually getting a lot of the backstory on what's going on. These items are all numbered out of 75 and are stored permanently in your folio, meaning that even if you restart the game, all of the ones you've already picked up will still be saved. As you may have guessed, the main focus of the game is on puzzles, but the puzzles aren't really puzzles, and 99% of the time it just involves finding an item and then putting it somewhere else. This can get a bit monotonous at times, and I believe that this is why the folio items are scattered throughout the game to keep you interested. I began the first area of the game very open-minded, but it did feel like it dragged on a bit after a while. Going back and forth to different areas of the farm with no real goal in mind, and sometimes having to backtrack to areas after missing items, could be a little annoying at times. This big empty farm did make me feel like it was building up to something, however, and after getting the keys to this mysterious metal door, I was surprised to be greeted with the cutscene. The corn I mentioned earlier finally make their big appearance and prove very quickly that although they can talk, they're not very smart.
So, which one of us is named Jim? Am I Jim? I thought he was Jim. No, that's Bill. Where's Bill? You're Bill. Oh, that's right.
After some silly banter between the corn, you're sent down to the next area of the game, which seems to be a secret facility. This is where I start to form some mixed opinions. For one, I'm a little disappointed because I was hoping that there'd be more gameplay mechanics introduced to the game after this first area, but unfortunately you're still basically just doing an item fetch, except in a different location. The positive, however, is that this is where the story gets much more interesting and much more humorous.
What? What are you looking at? Something on Vlad's face?
From here on out, every so often you'll find notes left behind by the two owners of the facility, Bob and Ted. These two are arguably the best thing about this game, even though you only get to know them from their sticky notes. Bob, an irresponsible and selfish man-child who is constantly spending their company's money on things they can't afford, and Ted, a rude no-nonsense grouch who is too busy trying to reprimand Bob to actually get any work done, are one of the best comedic duos ever. One of my favorite moments is that after seeing tons of paintings and statues of Bob all over the facility, Ted finally snaps and decides to have a statue of himself made as well. Not to be outdone, of course, Bob responds by placing a gigantic one right next to it. One of the major flaws of this game is that it lacks any real challenge. The only time you'll really be prevented from progressing is if you've missed an item in a specific room, which means that instead of thinking over how to solve a difficult puzzle, it's more just you getting frustrated for having to backtrack so much. There are a few exceptions to this, such as this area where you need to replace a reactor core within a set time limit before the entire place blows up. This sounds simple enough, except that you're forced to race through a maze to do so. Maze. There isn't really too much else to say about this game without just delving more into the story, and that would just spoil it and take away from the main reason that you might want to play it. I do have to say that the end credit song is one of my favorites in a video game. Just make sure that you read all the folio items carefully so you really understand why. If you do happen to miss it, replaying through the game isn't too bad since you'll be able to get through it much more quickly, and you may even notice some things you missed before. The other thing I'd like to mention is that you can only have one saved game going on at a time. This usually wouldn't be too annoying for me, except that since the folio items are automatically saved, you're unable to let someone else experience the game for the first time on your copy, unless you erase the Steam data folder entirely. I also had to do this when recording the gameplay footage since I had already played through a good chunk of the game beforehand. So, Maize. It's far from perfect and definitely isn't for everyone, but if you're willing to sit through some gameplay that can be a bit sluggish at times in order to experience a genuinely funny and entertaining story, I say give it a try. Hey guys, just letting you know that the Jay Plays Podcast Episode 2 is out now. It didn't get very much activity, which makes me think that either YouTube didn't send it to all of my subs or maybe it just sucked. Either way, let me know if you can. Thanks for watching.